Hi. You guys ever had the situation where you listen to the lecturer talk about how to do a problem and you get back home and you have no idea what he did? Or the next day and you're going, what the heck? How can it doesn't work. I can't do it. Or where you learn something, every time you learn it, 2 days later, 3 days later, you can't remember what it was or about, kind of, sort of, and you don't know how to apply it. Well, I want to help you with that. I'm going to help you how to get more out of what you learn and keep more of it. And to do that, it's important that you learn how the brain works so that you know how to hack it. So let's talk about. So I have some experience with this that I want to go over and some unusual experiences that will allow us to kind of dig into this a lot more. Okay. So first of all, my experience. So I have a PhD in anatomy from UCLA, specializing in brain neurochemistry, cell biology. I was a trained scientist. I had publications in peer-reviewed journals. I wrote best-selling titles and so on. And then I left that and became a serial entrepreneur. And then I went into teaching and taught high school biology, chemistry, and physics with credentials. And then I left that and went into business and have patents awarded and pending. So here's what we're going to cover. So first, a big mistake in my life, which is really relevant. Types of memory, how memory works, learning machinery of memory, how you build and you construct memories and how you forget things and so on. And then more importantly, and really what this is all about, is how all of that works in terms of so you can learn faster and easier. That's what we got to get through. Okay. So first of all, I was walking across the street out in Montebello helping a friend with his car, and a drunk driver ran into me at about 40, 45 miles an hour, and I flew 10, 15 feet in the air and landed on my head. And I lost consciousness right away and was then, in and out of consciousness for the next 5 days. I don't remember that at all. I vaguely remember the trip to the next hospital. So in and out of, in the next hospital for the next, 2 or 3 months that I was there, for the first few weeks, people would walk into my room and I'd say, what happened to me? Why am I here? What happened? I have this weird metal structure around my leg. And they would tell me, oh, you were in this accident. And 10 minutes later, I'd ask them the same question because I wasn't able to turn any of my short-term memories into longer-term memories. And so I kept forgetting it again. That was one problem. Then there was another problem that happened was that I was, we all have filters for how we process the things around us in the world. So do you feel the pressure on your feet? Now you do because I mentioned it. But otherwise we don't. We filter that out because turns out our brain can only handle a certain amount of information at a time. Well, all of those filters for me were turned off. And I, basically was getting this flood of information into me all the time. And later, when my wife finally took me home from the hospital, I had to close my eyes. There was just too much information. Red car, blue car, green, it's up, it's down, it's sideways. I was in sensory overload. There was too much information. So it took me quite a while, almost a year, to rebuild my memory. I forgot the name of everything. I remembered events, but all of the emotion connected with the events was gone. The names of the things were gone. So I had to rebuild my memory. It took about a year of work, and going through list after list after list. And I was able to do it. And I recovered pretty well. I screw up names, but oh well. But so everything more or less worked out. But, as it turns out, as I've researched this, people that have mild traumatic brain injuries or moderate traumatic brain injuries don't have a great survival rate in many cases. And people that have more education, in fact, do better. I mean, being healthy, if relatively young, and then having more education has a protective effect. Anyway, let's go on how all of this applies to learning. So first of all, let's talk about the components that are involved in the brain. So we have cells, neurons, and here, let me put a pointer on here. So we have neurons. Here's one neuron here, and it extends as another one, and they're connecting at synapses. This pointer doesn't work very well. Let me see if I can find a better one. Well, it doesn't. Okay, here, let me see if I can do it this way. Let's see. No, that doesn't work. Anyway, so in between the neurons are these synapses where they connect together. Here is showing on the bottom right-hand side, there's that purple thing and those little red dots going across. Those are neurotransmitters like serotonin or oxytocin or, noradrenaline, acetylcholine. These are all different kinds of neurotransmitters that go between one nerve cell and another nerve cell. And then the cell body where the various things are made and so forth. Anyway, so these are the neurons. Okay, let's move on. Now, the basic memory unit is the thing called the engram neuron, and it's only been discovered in the last 8 or 9 years. The idea of it was around for a long time, but they kept looking for where memory was stored. They would train mice on how to do something, and they would cut out one part of the brain or the other, and they couldn't identify where memory was. And so, in fact, there was one guy named Lashley who said, memory is a process in a population, not a thing in a place. And in a way, he was right. It turns out it's a network of these things. And it's in the last 8 or 9 years with new advanced techniques, they were able to identify where these neurons were and so on. And all of those then combined together to give us the memory of various types, anywhere from sensory memory that lasts very, very short periods of time, like a vision only lasts milliseconds. We can store it for a little while. Auditory memories can be stored a little longer. Those get converted into short-term memories where it's stored temporarily. And then eventually it gets converted into long-term memories. Those long-term memories can either be things that we're aware of, that we're conscious of, or things that are procedural, like things that we aren't aware of, unconscious things like how to brush your teeth or how to comb your hair or how to turn on the blinker in your car. Once we learn that, it gets turned into that. We don't think about it, or how to walk even. Those are things that we learn over time. Now, another way to look at memory is, in fact, something called working memory. It's a different model of memory. And in that model, that can last 10 to 15 seconds. And you see one of the key things there is the 4 to 7 chunks. So there was a guy named Ebbinghaus, we'll talk about him more a little bit, that basically said that, in fact, he thought you can only basically absorb 7 chunks of information at a time. That could be a vision, it could be a thought, it could be a hearing, something. You can only do 7. Now they've said it's probably more like 4. So let's assume that it's between 4 to 7 bits of information that you can handle at a time. Okay? Now there's one way of looking at that. Now, as I said, remember when I became aware of things in the hospital, I didn't have any filters. And so to me, it was more like 10 to 15,000 bits of information coming in. And then I would grab little bits and pieces of it, but I couldn't absorb much. And when my wife was taking me home from the hospital, it was so much I had to close my eyes. It was too much information. Okay. Now let's move on. So that's the brain. And that golden thing there is the hippocampus, which is involved in short-term memory. The visual cortex is in the back of the head. The auditory cortex is in the temporal lobe. All right? It's just kind of a pretty picture. Now, let's talk about how memories are built. I'm going to go through several of these fairly quickly. So in the first 10 seconds, you have the information from your various senses coming in. The brain filters out most of it, only letting you have 4 to 7 chunks of that information that goes into short and working memory. And then you have synapses that fire and they get strengthened. There's electrical signals that happen, and it starts to encode the memory of what was perceived. This is very short, for the first few seconds. Okay? And these signals are sent back and forth between the hippocampus for short-term memory. That was that golden thing. The amygdala, which is involved in emotions. The neocortex, or cortices, plural. And other brain structures to consolidate that memory. This is all, it's still barely a short-term memory at this point. Okay? And then over 10 seconds to 2 minutes, then it starts getting transferred to short and working memory. Okay? It's then repeated over and over and over. The signal is sent back and forth. It's rehearsed. And in the process of rehearsing it, it strengthens those synapses. It strengthens those memories, and they get stronger and more ability to fire. And then as well, there's a memory trace between different neurons, different engram neurons, which are found throughout the brain, not just the neocortex, but the prefrontal cortex and the hippocampus, and they're found all over the place. And those signals are sent back and forth. Not only that, but the various neurons that fire get tagged so that memories are stored in certain sets of neurons. Okay? In the 2 to 20 minute time period, the signaling between different areas of the brain are activated. This turns out to be very important in terms of learning faster because more areas of the brain are connected. So you have things that then connect up with other things you already knew or about colors or visions or whatever. So you have more paths to it. Okay? More synapses are created between more parts of the memory network. Synapses get stronger, fire again, okay? And then the memory traces gradually get stronger and the less fragile ones are erased, okay? So the memory traces that get fired over and over and over get stronger. The ones that aren't fired over and over get pruned away and removed, okay? Now, if we move on into the longer term area, then again, it's continuing to get stronger. So in essence, what happens, you see, if you think about it, the memories are first encoded, and then they're gradually turned into long-term memories, and then they're maintained. So we're now doing this. Now, when you rest or when your brain isn't working as hard, it repeats it over and over. It's replayed over and over, and signals from the hippocampus are sent to the visual cortex, and from the visual cortex back to the hippocampus. And the same thing happens from the auditory cortex for hearing back and forth to the hippocampus. The hippocampus is like the index for it. And these signals go back and forth, and they're gradually transferred to the neocortex. As it turns into longer-term memories, these short-term memories are gradually transferred to the neocortex, which is the outer cortex, the most advanced, so to speak. Okay, and then it's maintained more and more and more. So you get consolidation. This happens more during sleep. Different kinds of memories are consolidated in sleep, whether it's episodic and semantic memories like the names and the facts and so on like that, or whether it's procedural, how to do something, or emotions, from your amygdala. Now, if something terrible happens to you, you remember it pretty quickly. You don't need to practice it over and over and repeat it over and over and over. If something terrible happens in your life, people tend to repeat that memory in their heads automatically. They can't stop. And the amygdala sends emotions back and forth to the hippocampus, and eventually those memories become much, much stronger, much faster. Okay? So again, problem solving and creativity with REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep, and you get that strengthening and pruning that happens. And then over 4 to 24 hours and beyond into the years, that memory gets consolidated more and more. The memory traces are moved from the hippocampus and just out to the neocortex, long-term memories. And then it's distributed between different neocortical areas, and synaptic changes become more permanent. The memories are frequently replayed and over and over and over. Now, the memories aren't just stored. Turns out that the memories are rebuilt based upon where they were first recorded, where those memory traces were, and the hippocampus, the indexing, so to say. Well, here's what happens. If you keep replaying it over and over and over, just like a crowd that whispers, a secret to, the next person over, the next person over, the next person over, as those things get rebuilt over time, over, 30 years or 40 years, sometimes those memories change and they aren't exactly the same. Just think about a couple that maybe has been together for a long time and they think back to what it was like when they first got married, and they have different visions. Okay. So now the fact that you have that memory stored in many, many places over time, people with more education, with more background, with more experience, then have more protective effect. So if some part of the brain is damaged or interrupted like it was for me, then there's more pathways possible to recover that memory, which is what happens, which is maybe one of the reasons for the protective effect of more education. So just by listening to this, you're going to live longer and recover from brain damage more. All right, let's move on. Now, it turns out that, in fact, our brain has the prefrontal cortex, and the front of the brain up here is a thing that's very important in deciding what to focus on and what to pay attention to and so forth. And it becomes a bottleneck. That and the parietal cortex, which is on the side, and the visual cortex and the hippocampus, they all decide together what's important to pay attention to, what's important for survival. That's the key thing. So you don't get eaten by the saber-toothed tiger again, And it tends to filter out most things, except unless you have a damaged brain, and then you can't really control it. Because in my case, there was damage between my hippocampus and temporal lobe and frontal cortex, and there was all kinds of stuff that happened, and it took months for me to recover. But I did. Okay? So only 4 to 7 chunks of that information, depending upon the difficulty, is allowed to get through to your working memory where you can do stuff with it. Now, it has limited resources. So if you have divided attention because you're looking at your phone, just the act of looking down at your phone and then looking up at the person who's lecturing or the slide deck takes 200 to 300 milliseconds. Just that alone. Just switching back and forth takes that amount of time. And so just the act of moving back and forth or having split attention is going to limit how much you can focus and how fast you can remember. So obviously, if you want to remember more of a lecture, pay attention, okay? Now, if it's really difficult material, it's going to be harder to remember because your brain has to work harder. Now, your brain uses 20% of the energy of your body. It takes a lot of energy to run your brain. And so, if you can be more efficient about it, your brain's going to work better. Okay? That turns out to be pretty important. So if it's really familiar information that you have reviewed over and over and over, like you're a chess player and you've played thousands and thousands of games, you can just, glance at the chessboard and know what happened before and what's going to be next, versus a beginner who's just totally lost. Or somebody who's an artist and sees immediately, how to sculpt the block of wood. Okay? So that means that there's more information in the long-term memory that you don't have to work so hard to create. You can just access it, and so it takes less chunks of memory. So now if you can break down the really complicated information into smaller bits, it works better. When people look at memory experts, they break things down into smaller chunks. Think about your Social Security number, or your phone number. It's blocks of 3, 2, and 4 in the case of Social Security number, or 3, 3, and 4 in the case of your phone number. We tend to like to have those smaller blocks. And memory experts will block things down like that too. It makes it faster for processing. Okay? Now, if you can see things in a chart or a graph, like a picture is worth 1,000 words, it'll help you to remember it. So by having more connections to other parts of your brain, you're able to access things that say, oh, that's like that picture I saw of the waterfall. Oh, I'll remember it like the picture of the waterfall. Oh, I can think about the memory by putting it in my kitchen cabinet. I know in that cabinet, I'll put it here and I can put it there. And so there are these memory games that you can do by accessing it, which is basically allowing you to access smaller bits of information at a time. Now, if you can reduce your study time, now some people have the ability to focus for 3, 4, or 5 hours, but it's going to be to your advantage to avoid, the enormous fatigue, memory fatigue, if you can break it into chunks of 20 minutes, 25 minutes. Break it smaller chunks if possible. And teachers learn that as well, to not just talk for an hour straight, but to, have maybe 10 minutes or 15 minutes, and then they have an activity, or they'll have a brain pause or something, or they'll ask for students to talk about it, some other way of communicating. So cramming takes longer. You ever cram? Do you remember cramming? So it's stressful. And when you do that, your adrenal glands, which are the glands that sit on top of your kidneys, they release cortisol, and that interferes with memory and laying down memories. Okay? it limits your long-term sleep, and so you aren't able to get that REM and slow wave sleep to help consolidate those short-term memories into long-term memories. So you're going to forget it fast. It's going to be very, very brief. It'll be, skin-thin memories, and you won't remember it. Okay? Information that's processed so quickly leads to a lower attention span, lower focus, lower retention. Okay? Rote memorization, superficial learning. Okay? And chronic, sleep deprivation and stress, it leads to less brain plasticity. Your brain is just going to be less flexible in learning new things. You're going to be able to connect it up with other things with less ability. Okay? And new crammed information can interfere with, previous learned information. You can't access the old stuff as well either because you've layered on a bunch of junk on the top. Okay? You can't access the other stuff. And you haven't given yourself a chance to consolidate that memory. That takes time. All right? So, turns out that if you space the repetition, so if you review your notes, if you look at the graph here, if you review your notes, let me see if I get this pointer to work again here. So, let me see, is this pointer working? Okay, here we go. Let's see if it works. So this is the Ebbinghaus curve on the bottom there. That's how fast we're learning. But if you repeat it, the first time you repeat it, it doesn't decay as fast. And the second time, it doesn't decay as fast as well. And so by the third repetition, maybe after 9 hours, you see that instead of losing, 40% of your information, you're only losing, 30% of your information. Or losing 60%, versus 30%. So you retain a lot more of it each time you repeat it. So one of the keys to really being able to do better is to do spaced repetition, okay? The synaptic memories, you have chance for your brain to make those connections in the synapses stronger. More of the neurotransmitter receptors are made. Proteins are synthesized. Neurotropic, things are made to make the neurons stronger. Okay? During sleep, it's more consolidation into longer-term memories. Okay? And there's more time for deeper reflection and connection with other networks of memories. You connected up more things. And so because you can remember, it's like the waterfall, for example, or the kitchen cabinet, it's easier to remember that information. Now, if you just review your notes at night, okay, you had the lecture at 2 in the afternoon, you got busy, 7 o'clock, you sit down and you review it for 10 minutes. It doesn't even take long. You're going to remember it way better for the next day. And if you review it maybe after 1 day, and then after 3 days, and after 5 days, then by the 5th or 6th time you review it, it's pretty much solid. You've connected up with so many other neurons, it's going to stick around for a while. Now, the other thing you can do by doing variations like this, spaced repetition, you can try different versions of it. So you can have a broader understanding of it. You can try different ways of remembering it backwards, remembering it forward, remembering it in color, remembering it in different ways. You connect it up with more parts of your brain, so you're going to remember more information for longer with less effort. That means better grades for less work. Why not? Okay? So now there are, Socrates says, know thyself. You got to really know how you learn. So if you tend to need to learn something in a slow, easy way, then you may want to do it this way. That's a slow learning curve, okay? So you want to review the contents, first of all. That it doesn't matter whether you're doing something hard, difficult, get the, like you want to know the lay of the land, okay? You want to have an instructor demonstrate it if possible. You want to watch somebody do it. Okay, so sort of a key for all of this is see, do, feedback. So see, you want to watch somebody doing it. Okay, you want to combine that skill, see if you can do the same thing they just did. Try it yourself. Put it in your own words. See if you can say what they did in your own words. Start with simple examples and gradually get to be more difficult examples, bit by bit. Okay, track your progress and give yourself a reward when you do something well. That's important. That's really crucial. You want to reward yourself. You'll remember faster because it'll be more fun. And you'll get the dopamine hit. That's important. Okay, now, and you want to get feedback. How did I do? Was it good enough? Did I forget something? What should I do to improve? Okay, also feedback. Okay, now, let's say that you know you're going to tackle something difficult. You're going to decide, I'm going to learn Adobe After Effects, which has got a very steep learning curve. Or you're going to learn something really, really hard, like your boss has assigned you to do all of the accounting for the business. And you say, well, I have never done accounting before. He says, well, you've got a week to learn accounting, okay, because we need you. All right. So again, you want the lay of the land. You want to watch videos if possible. You want to combine the skills of what you already know with other memories you already have. You want to visualize and restate those things in your own words. It's still basically almost the same thing. A little different is now you want to repeat those examples and then you want to go further and create your own stuff. You want to not just you want to experiment a lot, but you want with more difficult material to the point where you can even teach somebody else. In fact, what every teacher learns very quickly is the fastest way to learn something is to teach it. So teach yourself, teach somebody else. You're going to learn way faster. Okay? Track your progress again. Give yourself that reward. Get your feedback. This is it. This is the basis. All right? So now, that's the end of these. And I think that if you follow these, that you're going to be able to do much, much better at learning and learning faster and having more fun doing it and remembering more of what you get, getting better grades. Now, if you have any questions, contact me at info@scienceglen.com, or the number is 661-402-1778, and I'd be happy to help you in any way I can. All right? Thank you so much.